Hi everyone, and welcome to another wonderful evening of Art Salon. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Henning Haupt, who I met at a DBA show in Broward 3 years ago, I think. The Doing Business as Artists as Entrepreneurs that comes out of the Artists as Entrepreneur Institute. And a number of people who come to the salons have been graduates of that also. It's a wonderful program, and they do an exhibit once a year that's a juried exhibit, and it was my pleasure and privilege to be juried into it, and Henning was in the same show. He does something kind of interesting and different in that he comes from a background in architecture, and he's combined his experience in architecture with his interest in art and in drawing and painting. And so he's working with color and with lines and with space in very interesting ways, and increasingly using the paintings and the drawings that he creates to build installations, room-filling installations and wall-filling paintings, and using space in very creative ways and using materials in very creative ways. Henning comes from Germany. He's been in the United States since, I think, 2008. He's on the faculty at FAU in the School of Architecture. And so he's still working and thinking as an architect, but more as an artist. And it's going to be fascinating to hear how he puts those two together. With pleasure, I introduce Henning Haupt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Al, for the introduction and having me invited to the little talk here, or the big talk we will see. Al pointed out a little bit of my background within architecture and painting. I did education for myself over years in different architecture schools in Germany mainly. I did continue to study art as well at the Cranbrook Academy of Art here in the United States, and my life was going back and forth between USA and Germany as well. And I ended up teaching architecture with this artistic background. I tried to introduce as much as artistic approaches and processes into the education for architectural design students, especially in the foundation years. I do have some headlines in my presentation, and there's like right here on the first page, there's questions up there, so it hints a little bit to this academic realm, what I'm as well covering. I will not go so much into depth of that tonight. I would rather show the work leading up to that exhibit with a similar title, Drawing Lines, Making Space, what was up in the Coral Springs Museum of Art this year from March to May. And so we took a similar title for this presentation. Nevertheless, want to show you work what leads up to that and what's older, and showing the whole breadth of my work basically in regard to color, space, and painting and architectural making as well. And it starts out here with the painting, because that's where I start. It's not so much that I'm starting with the architectural, with the spatial thing, rather with the technique and the method and the materials of painting itself. So for many years I do these smaller and larger canvases and boards with color space paintings, what I call them, so they create a certain kind of spatial effect perpendicular to the surface of the painting. So that's what I call the color space, this back and forth into the space and towards the viewer. And that's basically one way of creating illusion of space on the picture plane. And the other approach I use is the drawing as well, creating space. And it's not a space what is a representation of the actual physical surrounding we are sitting in. It's not a perspectival drawing. It's not representing what is. It's rather a gestural, that's a difficult word for a foreigner. It's a drawing of gestures relating back to my own movement in front of the canvas, in space, and so on. They as well relate back a little bit to figure drawing, which I did for many years, and landscapes as well, what comes back in most recent work which I did this summer, what I show you at the end today. These are basically the different means to use just the lines without representation of space to making space just by the overlapping of lines and a little bit adding white tones on this paperboard. These are large paintings or drawings, so they're about 5-6 feet. So that's the second realm of making space. Here's some smaller examples which show more drastically how the color comes into play here. The color is not in the paint, the color is in the crayon, and the only tone of paint I'm using in these is white paint. But the crayon, as some of you might know, takes off from the paper and then smears around and blurs and creates those untangible yet spatial illusions of space, of color on the paper in composition, in connection with the line weights of the different drawings. This is the same series. It's always the motto or the theme was a little bit how two things come together or not. They are separating entities or overlapping entities. Here's the same thing, but using white and as well black paint. So it's a combination of both. And then the crayons that add some red and earth tones to it. This is almost like a diagram of a series I did in 2010, so it's a while ago. Just using black and white, black lines on white paper, basically using different kind of gestural qualities to create spatial drawings and then painting them in with a roller technique. So it's not painted with a brush, it's painted with a foam roller from Home Depot. That's where we get them, right? The cheapest ones. It's a juxtaposition of different attitudes towards the line, towards making space. Some are more architectural, some more fluid, some are more organic, and here's some of them in more detail. So what I do is always, many work I do is in series of 3 and multiples of those, because they're always investigations in a new topic I'm setting for myself, what comes up out of the own process from working over years. And so one leads to the next. And I see my work more as inquiry at that. It's not so much that I have to produce now, I need to produce this and that painting. It's rather that I'm curious into these questions and I continue working on those. But specific for me, the questions are related to material, to the process of making, and to space. And it's getting more and more architectural, but still the lines might remind us on perspectival representations, but then they don't really work, right? It's fake perspective, so it's fake architecture, what's only possible on the surface of a drawing. I showed those in Miami at a co-op I was showing some years ago, art forms. The hanging creatures are not my work, by the way. It was a partner show with Natasha Dubin, so we showed together, and the painting on the left is mine as well, but not the hanging pushels, I call them. So taking the lines and the gestures into space, I built this boards out of gypsum board, drywall basically, 8 feet high, 4 feet wide. I do pretend that these boards are endless surfaces. I draw on them and I paint on them. I add the paint with the roller again to have a really quick process. And afterwards I define the shape out of the drawing. So that's done in art history by many artists in the 50s and 60s. Blinko Palermo was one of the first ones from Eastern Germany and others. But with all these processes, I feel I always go through all these things which happened before. And here's some proposals how they could be placed in an exhibit as a project in a larger scope. And it shows off a little bit, hopefully, that these, especially on the right-hand side, the image shows that these paintings now become objects in space, which not only create visual space on the surface, but also among them, between this. So that's why I drew it out black on the right-hand side, to highlight that area. That's basically what I'm looking at, the spatial illusion on the plane and in the actual space, in this case flat on the wall. So now that was flat, now 3D, right? How can we get into the space? Can color build objects in space? And I did many of these works in 2005. It was part of my dissertation I was working on at that time, praxis-based dissertation in the field of architecture, actually engineering, yet very artistic. And I built these things out of paintings out of paper. I painted on paper in different layers. It's almost the same techniques at the very beginning, the paintings I showed you. Transparent colors in about 6 layers, creating different nuances of green in this case, and building a space in the surface of the painting. And then the last layer is a decision to make cuts into the painting, take it apart, and I put it back together in the 3-dimensional object. So it's the last layer is basically a cut, and then the process of reworking it. Here's the same thing in 3 images. So that was basically, there was many of these works which I did over the time, connecting physical space with a color space, which is more visual. And teaching architecture, being as an artist in the field of architecture, I tried to address the architectural scale. So finally to build really a space we can walk in. Coming over to the United States, teaching at FAU, I found this wonderful project space in Fat Village, which is huge, and finally had the right scale to actually build something in. So everything somehow joined in nicely, that I was teaching, continuing the research. I had a studio to paint and try out and prepare the work, and to actually build it in Fat Village, sponsored by grant monies from the Broward County. Here's a view on that installation. That's the view you have when you get in. So you see just wood, plywood, and sticks supporting the whole system. And then you walk around and, oh, that was just the intro photo. That's how I planned this out. Okay, so these are actually the panels I was working in. You're going to see them again in a moment. So I painted flat. These are 8 by 4 feet plywood panels. I did 30 of those over the course of about 6-8 months, from May to January 2011 to 12. And now it came handy, the technique I developed earlier in the smaller version I showed you, with a foam roller, now a larger roller, 6 inches instead of only 3, so it could really quickly produce those surfaces of multi-layered colors. Up you see the entire series of 30 panels. Down below, and the layout and the decision, again, the last layer, the cuts in the painted surface that somehow relate to the painting or not. It might complement it or contrast it, but somehow it relates to that, I would hope. And down below, the cut pieces on one Saturday were cut apart, and then beforehand I had figured out the construction and the model so it would fit in the space and would be somewhat site-specific. Next Sunday, I had a team of 6 people putting it together from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Actually, we managed, but everybody was a little exhausted. And then the next day had to be arranged to be organized like this. So that's the whole figuration now, making the colors, bringing the colors into space. And here, hopefully, we have the simultaneous illusion of the painted space and the architectural space to walk in. And we relate simultaneous to both of those. And on the outside, the painting on the inside basically is resulting into the construction on the outside. The construction was manufactured to accommodate different angles without planning it out. So I didn't have an exact plan of the angles. I decided that on the site while setting it up. So it was a pure design-build project. But the system allowed that to just post the post on the back in the needed position, and it made this pretty neat pattern on the outside as well. The architect colleagues of mine came into the show and said, "Oh, that's a wonderful construction, well done." But somebody painted on the inside. And that's actually a good point, because the architects are trained from the modernist time. It's all about the form. It's all a white, pure form. So architects make form first, and then maybe they come with a bucket of paint and paint it, or ask the artist to make a mural or whatever. This research project is basically the other way around. So I paint first and then try to develop a spatial illusion, a space out of that. So the joke was right on the point, actually. Here's the whole thing again.
This is all 30?
Yes, those are 30 panels, 8 by 4 feet.
Henning, they're bent.
Yes.
What holds them in that angle?
Well, you see those construction on the back. So each panel, each part of the panel had 2 boards on the back that were screwed on two. And those two tracks, basically, they were connected to two other boards, and then they fold together. Some more images from the inside. And the view along. And I was happy to show it later on at the Young and Art Museum. That was kind of neat. And those photos are from that. So the installation changes a little bit depending where I put it together. Just 2 or 3 slides from the background to this research. And that's the title of my dissertation I finished in 2009, Color Experiments, Integration of Painted Color Spaces in an Architectural Design Process. Sounds more complicated than it is, but yes, it's a research project based on the things you saw, based on the practical endeavors on the making, and then backed up with research in art history, in history of architecture, in history of perception of color, perception of space, and theory in general on how aesthetics influence the production of the work I did. But basically the core of this that I'm combining on the left-hand side in that diagram, the space and the spatial illusion of the color, what we can sense, what we feel as well, together with the very measurable spatial arrangement of the architectural space, and both come together in the senses of the human being. So that's basically the thesis of the dissertation, and this is the main image for that as well. So on the left-hand side, we got those 2 people in a room, like we are sitting here, and we are relating to the room by means of measurement. I mean, if I fall over 3 times, I know this room is 18 feet wide, right? If I fall over 4 times in 24 feet. So I relate my height to the room. I relate my hand when I grab a brick. I know the building's very high because it's many bricks when I see a brick wall outside, and so on. So we relate bodily to the space we perceive, we sit in, that's how we know, oh, this is tiny, or this is big, or this is comfortable or not. So that's one way of perception. On the right-hand side, it's called the corporeal perception of the color space. So it's more a sensing of the distance. So we see the space and we somehow acknowledge a spatial illusion, but the painting and the color is flat, right? Physically measurable, it's nothing there, right? So it's a sensing. And this sensing now is simultaneously combined with this measurable, with this bodily perception. So those go together. And that's a little bit the difference, what as well I do with my color teaching compared to other teaching, because I try to teach color within space and not on the surface. It's especially interesting for sculptors and for architects and so on, and designers. So that's a little bit about the theory. That's how it looks practical in a diagram. That's a little model I made when I finally figured out in that dissertation what I'm doing. I think I have to make a little model. So basically it's 5 panels on the left-hand side symbolizing paintings. They have spatial illusion on the surface, and then they can fold together to a space. And now in that diagram, I think that overlap is more or less obvious. All right, I want to go on with my few questions here. All of these questions as well show a specific project related to that. So this is a site-specific architectural intervention. What is a painting on an existing curved wall? So in this case, I was not able to recut and reshape the space. They would not let me do, but at least they allowed me to go in and paint on it whatever I thought I wanted to do. And this is the entry lobby of a chemistry lab in Fort Lauderdale, actually. And they commissioned me for this work. And it's pretty interesting because they invented actually a product that draws, I think the better word, heavy metal out of water. So it's like a tea bag you put in the water, and the dirt and the bad stuff is coming out. So it's a cleansing device, what's super sustainable. And so this idea of this changing color landscape might relate to that attitude, at least what they have in that company. At the same point, it relates back to the round shape of the space of the wall, the circle in the ceiling, and it's a wayfinding device as well, because that's the way where you find the main offices and the meeting rooms and so on. It's a similar technique I used again with a roller. Many layers. I worked on this for about 2 weeks, and then I built up the spatial illusion on that plane. Here's the detail of that, so you get a feel for this almost pixelated. And what's to me kind of interesting, so it brings painting a little bit in this our digital times and relates to what we see on the computer. And yes, it's handmade and crafted, but on the other hand, it relates to our almost common perception on pixelated images at the same moment.
Do the contour lines come before or after the painting?
Both. That's a good question. In this case, I did start out with some soft pencil lines. I used those basically to throw me off and get started because it's pretty tough to make a wall dirty. So I run around with a pencil and make some outlines, and then I paint, and it's like the lines that work almost like a guide in between, or like a rebar in concrete, helping out the stabilization of the thing. It's not really representing anything, it's just documenting, you could even argue, the motion of my existence in the space. It becomes more obvious in one of the next work, actually. Yes, sure, anytime.
Have you created a small model first? Do you know when you go into a space this big, pretty much where the colors are going to be?
No, I mean, this case, I had to promise something to a client. So, and I had to thank them a lot for the trust into my works. They saw work and they trusted me that it will be all right. And together we sat down for half an hour. I made a sketch. Then that responsible person said, yes, we want to do it. And then I reworked the sketch and said, okay, this is roughly the color palette, that's roughly the layout. Are you okay? Yes, we're okay. That's all I had. And then I started. All of my paintings are similar to that. I start with some guidelines, some restrictions, and then it gets going. Restrictions I like a lot. Maybe I'm German. For another show coming up in Miami, there's going to be a show in the fall about all German artists, actually, and I'm supposed to write an essay how my work is German. And I think it's going to be a tough thing to do, and maybe you guys help me later today to give me some insights how this is German or not. I have no clue. But what I do like in my work is, I call it rules actually, and assignments. So there are certain things which are pretty clear defined. This is a body of work of 38 drawings, the blind drawings, I call them. And I started out with a white crayon on white paper, so I cannot see what I do. I can feel what I do, but I cannot see it. Like I do these gestural lines. Since I couldn't see what I do, I could not relate that the first line relates to the second and the third to the one before, because I had no clue. I could remember it somewhat, but I substituted that visual information, what you get or what we get when we make a painting, with an assignment. So I said, well, like the one on the left, what is it? Go back and forth across from edge to edge. So that becomes as well the title. Or the second one's up and down and create height and density on the left. So I gave myself very factual and clear assignments for all of these 38 paintings, drawings. After doing those, I added black paint on top, and then the white crayon became visible. And I allowed myself to now compose and emphasize the image with multiple layers in certain areas and less layers in other areas. That's why maybe it's on the most right-hand side image has this wider, lighter center down below and the darker edges. So that's added on afterwards. And those paintings are now, to me, they propose or offer to the viewer the combination, which is very rational, very clear, defined by the title. There's a description of what it is something like 1 and 1 is 2. Right? And then the paint comes into play and the spatial illusion comes, the drawing is gestural, something else is happening. It's a painting, hopefully, it speaks by itself. And something else is happening, so 1 and 1 is all of a sudden 3 or 4 or 5, depending on your perception, on whatever you or the viewer brings to the game. So almost this work is almost like a diagram, what I do with other more complex pieces. And I continued with the blind drawings because I was so fascinated by it. I was fascinated because it pushed me to get out of my comfort zone. I did all of a sudden line weights and line densities and patterns which I never would do before, because I would dismiss them right away because I see them and I would not relate to them and I would not repeat them. Now I couldn't see it, I could only orchestrate my move of the hand, but not the outcome, which is a little bit of a difference. And that pushed me off to things which in the first moment, maybe I thought it would be ugly, right? And I have a big thing going with beauty. I mean, I think my artwork is about beauty as well, and that's fine. That's good to have in my case. But the issue with the beauty is not getting tired and repeating the same thing, because then the beauty turns into random boredomness. I get bored easily, so we want to keep going and strive for new things. But I added with the blind technique, I started out with the white lines on white paper, but then continued multiple layers on top of those by being blindfolded myself. So I locked my studio door up and blindfolded myself and did that, which is a pretty intense moment, and they do that sometimes in art school. It's a common assignment. These are done the same way, but you can tell there's one layer of vertical lines, one layer of horizontal, and the circle. So the viewer is basically invited to discover the making of the thing as well. I mean, you could just sit and enjoy the entire composition or the image, or start to read into the painting, or the other way is to decipher whatever got the painter to exercise that motion in front of the painting. I submitted those for the South Florida Cultural Consortium Fellowship for the Visual Arts in 2013. That's a long title, but we have to say it, right? And I got lucky to win it, and it was exhibited in Fort Lauderdale in 2013. So here's a series of those blind drawings in the Museum of Fort Lauderdale in summer of 13. And the curator of that show, he made a wonderful show and gave all of the selected artists had a chance to do additional specific work. And they gave me the long rounded wall to paint on, and I was shocked at the first moment, because it was 60 feet, it's 60 feet, it's a long wall. But on the other hand, it was a nice opportunity to really go into the museum and finally work in the museum for a while and paint on the wall. And here the lines have a stronger, play a stronger role actually in the drawing. My first intention was to, and I still want to do that sometimes if I get the possibility, to make a site-specific blind drawing, to act blind in space and really do that. But for this wall, it was just not. I was on a scissor cliff, on a ladder and everything. I would not do that blind. I was not. So I did this seeingly, but I combined the lines. It's all more obvious here. They're stronger lines. These are not pencil lines, these are crayon lines, so they come out a little stronger. And I reduced the palette on the other side. I just see two colors of the chinacodone, red and black. Here's the detail of the whole thing. So that's, and maybe I go back real quick, that's more of a documentation of me now moving in a space, because the space is so big. So that becomes, I hope, a little bit more clear in this work. That's the one issue. And it's more architectural in the sense it's this, the room is pretty narrow. On the left-hand side, there's the wall right away with the other drawings hanging, and it opens up, I think, a little bit by the placement of the two volumes on the left and the right, and the open space in the middle. It's almost like those fingertips touching in the middle, but they do touch in this case. They do. Can painting produce movement? The movement in this work is not an actual movement. It's not a motor. Nothing is turning. Nothing is rotating. But it relates back to me as moving in front of the papers I was painting. Each of them is about 10 feet long. Yeah, 120 inches. And 6 of those I made. So there was a lot of movement going on. And they installed like half-circle paintings. So the visitor is invited to become a mover and to move around and to visit the paintings from all different sides, and you just need a little step to the side to get a different glance on the entire thing. Right. And that's the one that was just published again on the, what you said, I think you sent around the article today, and the Think magazine in Miami was nicely published with a very charming article, actually. Always nice to see if that comes out.
For the whole collection?
For this piece, for the 6 paintings.
It's an article that I put on Facebook this afternoon.
Yeah.
So you can find it there.
Here's all 6 of them. So the upper row is the one side, the lower row is the other side. So 2 bulging the one way and 1, the middle one, the other way. And that fits into each other. So it's like a puzzle. And I tried to make those paintings that they relate to this roundness of the anticipated shape of the circular forms of the rings supporting the whole system. it's almost like crossing out, right? I draw something and then I cross over. And I like to argue that this maybe relates as well to digital perceptions we have or processes we use. Since it's almost again copying the same gesture on top of another thing. On the computer you always can copy paste, we do whatever, we delete. The difference with the painting, everything what we do, what I do, stays on it. And there's no joking around with that. And that's one thing what I really enjoy about the painting, that it's a real thing. It's a real action in space with a real struggle in the canvas, and it's only really enjoyable by the viewer being there and moving around.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah, sure, anytime.
when you're doing those big panels, how are you approaching them yourself? Do you have them flat on the floor, or do you have them?
I had them on the wall. Yeah, I do staple them to the wall at that time and then put tape on the sides so they get this nice white edge, what you see over here. So I tape that off first, then I staple to the wall, or I tape it to the wall, whatever's possible, depending what wall it is. And so I paint them vertically. I have to, otherwise it's already hard to see a 10 feet painting. Later on you will see paintings which are 35 feet, and it's getting more iffy to really remember when you walk over here and do something over there, that you remember what you did 10 seconds before on the other side, because you want to have that in mind. And it's hard to run back all the time. It's a workout.
I'm just wondering how you get the continuity of the movement if it's 7 feet.
I did it exactly as you just showed us.
Right?
It's not waving. Yeah, it's a continuous movement. Yeah, it's I don't know. Thank God there's no movies on that. It's not documented. I just move.
I guess you're quite tall.
It helps, of course. I think that has something to do. If I have, yes, I can reach high, and I do that, and I like to do the larger paintings. It has something to do, and I always try to do smaller things, and I get really contained, and the work gets more stifled or more complicated and less expressive and less strong, I think. Right, and we're getting to the end of the question session, and later on I have some more paintings. This was a public art project. We were asked by the city of Fort Lauderdale to do something with this nasty entrance in the city parking garage in Fort Lauderdale. On the left-hand side, it's the FIU downtown building where the School of Architecture is located. On the right-hand side, the garage. And the garage has this nasty entrance, which hundreds of students use every morning, every evening to go to school through that very sad moment of tunnel. So they were asked, can you do something with that? And of course it ended up in my color class, because color is the most inexpensive way of changing spaces. And we were happy to work on that. And it took us a little bit out of certain circumstances, but after 2 years it was implemented. And the last 6 months I worked together with a student, Dana Giannatasio, who got a research award actually for this. And we did those renderings. Those are renderings for the tunnel. On the left-hand side, those are objects. Those are the surfaces of the tunnel, the walls and the ceiling, taken off and used as a painting surface. Here's another example. So we tried out different variation on how to get the color into the painting. And what we basically did over the course of the time, we decided on the process of how we go about acting in the space way more than just taking an image and projecting the image into the space. So it was basically, Dane and I together learned how to paint this thing. He was an internship, basically I was an apprentice in my studio, learned the techniques and the medium and everything, and then we went in and painted it. These are still renderings. So we had a rough layout, and we had a sketch what goes heavier and lighter and where and what and not. The boards down the horizontal platform, that was not implemented. We asked the city to do that. We wanted to have that as a device to put light in from below into the ceiling. But they were short on budget, of course, and didn't want to do that. And they would have been nice to have the little deck there to hang out, or in the morning stop with your coffee and just hang there and meet with your friends. But it's not. So one Friday we finally entered the tunnel, taped all the difficult stuff off, and started with red on the left-hand side and added, I think, yellow, added blue, and then we got into this at the end. So that's the tunnel. And that was published nicely in the Palm Beach Broward New Times. And they voted the best public art project for 2014. I have to mention that and thank them for that. That was nice. It's a wild thing, but it's really uplifting in there. It's at least a friendly space. And
You had so many different models,
Yeah.
and there was beauty in each one of them in such different ways.
thank you. Yeah.
Coming to a final decision must have been very difficult.
Yeah, we decided to just decide the process and make another one. Instead of copying what we did already and enlarging it, because it's so much a difference as well to work small and to work bigger, right? It's hard to just enlarge it and copy paste it to make something bigger. I think it does not work out well.
Yeah, it's hard to stay excited about public art, but looking at that, it doesn't look like you had to compromise your art in order to create that space. It's really exciting.
That's a
Very
good.
dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, I'm involved with some public art processes in Fort Lauderdale in Broward County, and I'm sometimes surprised what we have to end up with. It might be good work, but some is very much adjusted in complicated ways and planned out, and it's rather a good design than a good piece of art in my eyes. And I make strong differentiation between architecture, design, and art. And it's hard to get good public art. It mostly ends up like a public design.
Do you think those colors would have been possible in some place like Germany?
I think it's possible. I do enjoy the bright colors here in Florida. I painted my house in bright colors. So I mean, we are close to the Bahamas and it's Florida, and yeah, I think the location plays into it. But the city they left us free hand. We had to make a proposal, and we were ready to go to the city commissioner meeting to present a long 20 minutes PowerPoint, and then the day before they called us up, no, it's good, we just show it and they sign it off, it will be okay. And it was okay, and then we got invited to do it, and nobody was talking to us anymore. I think the trick is the low budget and student work, and it's basically paint. So if somebody would really say, I hate this, I can't stand it, you can just paint it over tomorrow. And that's why it's probably easy to do something what is a little stronger and it does not need to accommodate everybody. But I think public art does not need to do that, because even if people get angry about it, it has its very good purpose. Because if you start discussing it, why I like it and you don't like it, then we have the point. That's fine. Then we have public art, right? A public communication, and that's, I think, what's the most important thing. All right, that's about. Yeah, the last question here is, what are the painterly qualities of lines in space? So, for finally to get to the title of the talk tonight, I started last summer in August. No, it was summer of 2013, I started to make the work in line. So it's moving away a little bit from the color, but focusing on the line and creating spaces again with the line, or going back to the very first two images of this presentation, combining the painting with the drawing even stronger. So, and there's different paintings came out of that. Some of them you showed at the very beginning. Here's little sketches. So I started out with smaller ones, like those are 29 by 22 inches, and taught myself basically how to use the line more efficiently and how to develop that into certain patterns which do follow those rules again. Some serial ideas are in there, and as well on the other side have something uncontrolled, very human, very related to my activity on the canvas, building paintings. And those are now larger canvases. This is about almost 2 meters. So it's a repetition of certain movements, either the round thing or the horizontal lines again. And now it becomes pretty clear how the process of the blind drawing kicks into this larger, more mature, developed work. And then I use those techniques basically and those approaches to produce different paintings, focusing on one or the other. It's a combination of 2 canvases, juxtaposing 2 very different attitudes towards making a painting out of lines. I do have 8 of those, which are light tones, just gray tones and blue tones. One of them actually This one is right now in the Boca Museum of Art. It was selected for the All Florida Biennial. And I did those out of a combination of literally drawing and painting. Literally meaning doing lines of pencil on the white canvas, real quick, really gestural, fast forward, and then repeating each line with a brush, painting it after. So there's an oil paint layer on top of each pencil line, either white on gray pencil or in this case blue on the gray pencil. This is the second one of those, 8 of those. And some of them have colors as well, and then I installed them in the museum show as a box. So it was now relating back to making space out of that. In this case, very simple, having a square floor plan, and this is more intimate space, which has the white tones in it, and we are entangled in these lines. And it was a pretty intense experience when, at the opening, there was actually 10 people standing in those lines. And then on the outside, it's stronger colors, having those more vibrant colors which have a stronger influence on the view from far away, right? They're more visible from far away. And those are the paintings which are 35 feet long on paper, displayed in the museum as a grounded shape. Actually, those 2 paintings coming up, they're now on show in the Fat Village project space. And it's open on the 30th next week again for the final day in Fat Village. And this is actually a title to this. This painting is called Lifelines. This is a detail on that. Again, the same thing, pencil and oil on top of it, now on paper, and now the shape of the canvas is developed out of the content of the painting on the surface. Use the whole thing together. I still need to work on
One piece of canvas or
paper. Yeah, it's about 50 inches high and 31 feet long. It's long. That's the other side, it's called Coastlines. Normally I don't have titles, the other titles just describe what's on the painting in terms of composition or color formations. But here I was so fascinated, I think. I was taken away from all those lines that I know so many things going on in my head at the same time. Because yes, of course, when I paint, I have a private story and there's content and other things happening, which I normally don't communicate. But in this case, and this was just so close to Florida and coastline and sea level rise and all that stuff, so I had to have a name called Coastlines. I just couldn't get away from it. All right, and I want to finish with some images what I did this summer. I was invited to fly up to Wyoming into the mountains for artist residency. And that was the most fantastic experience to be out there in these mountains for 2 weeks in a wonderful blockhouse with a wonderful studio in actually a wonderful hotel setting next to it. But the hotel invites artists. They have an artist camp for 8 people. They have 4 visual artists, 2 writers, and 2 composers every time, which is a very nice combination. And I was out there, and first what I did, went hiking. I mean, of course, just walking and running because it's just best to do. And there's this wonderful landscape, 2,000 meters high, 7,000 feet high, so it's a different air, it's a different situation. Amazing, beautiful rocks, which I know from the movies I saw as a child. Amazing kettles and trees somewhere, all placed beautifully. It looks like somebody decorated the whole scenery to me. That's the street to the ranch. And then there's fences, straight lines. There's poles for electricity, all that stuff, fences again, putting the kettles in place or the horses or whatever they have. I mean, some of you, it was all new to me. Okay, that's why was so fascinated as a German getting there the first time into that Western experience and seeing real cowboy boots and real horses and everything. So there's lots of fences and there's history with those fences, very tragic histories as well in that area. So I started just to paint the landscape. I couldn't help myself and started off again whereas at 0, did some watercolors, painting landscape and with some whiteouts in there, all kinds of techniques and try to get bigger. And so basically taking what I saw and the impressions of hiking around, walking around, taking that into studio and starting with simple things. I did a similar process when I really started at Kramberg Academy studying painting. Similar, that I saw the landscape, was painting landscape and going from there. But I noticed now doing that a few years later that it has a totally different impact, different speed and so on. And the other thing was that being at the residency for 2 weeks, I couldn't bring my oil colors because they wouldn't dry off in 2 weeks. So I started out with watercolors. I added some acrylic paint, like in these examples, and just tried to work myself into those different materials again, and they informed me to try different things and different procedures. Like scratching the paint onto the paper, and there's the straight lines, so it's the organic shapes and the other straight lines. Making spaces does the same thing, but hopefully, and this is more literally going back to the landscape and the elements in the landscape. These are still small things, 12 by 9 inches. And then I finally thought, well, got to come back to your real work and not just do this hobby painting, so I got to be more professional somehow. And I thought, well, then put them all together and bring the landscape into the studio. And so this is like, I mean, this is only some image I have. This went on over like a course of a week, and I did a photo like 3 times a week. This is just some photos to what I ended up with over. So that it shows a little bit how I build up the layers of the painting, in this case on the wall. So this is gouache on paper, pencil, crayon, and so on, different techniques. And the white straight areas are taped off. Here's a detail. And I feel that actually that painting some of those work as single paintings even better. It's so much information on the whole strip that it's a lot. There was a lot of stuff in that little cabin in there. Still small ones, those are the same. And then I went trying. I just flipped through these as a reference on how the work is developing over time. This actually has a title again, Rocks Don't Fly. Or was it Rocks Don't Fly, Pigs Don't Fly? We don't know. And finally stepping over and getting my larger boards out. So now we are talking about 40 inches and going from gouache into acrylic paint. And this now is the black lines are ink. Found those and diluted the ink in water and used it together with crayons and pencil. So the different techniques always inform different compositions. And there's the fences, right? So the shapes and the stuff, and coming back to that tragic stories. And those shapes, I mean, they keep repeating, they keep coming back. They are somewhat figurative, maybe. They're somewhat documenting the movement of my arm in front of the canvas, combining that with the ideas of space and maybe landscape. Those are now 4 by 4 feet, I think, 42 by 42 inches on paper. Blue line is called because I think this one blue line, this thing stood out. And you can tell, well, if you really try to focus and try to find out what's happening, so you see all the layers. So it starts off with like 3 or 4 lines, and then it builds up over about 2 days. I was pretty intense as a residency to get work done in 2 weeks, so I wanted to produce something as well, right? And then the straight lines, I developed techniques of painting with a ruler, so I could do straight lines or taping it off. Depends what's underneath, if the paint underneath comes off or not. And finally, calming down again a little bit. It was a little hectic. Some of the last ones I did, I had a nice conversation with a studio neighbor. She was composing. And she said, well, you do all this series. Are they meant to be like music over time? So she was writing on a piece for violin and piano, and she's creating pieces that follow up on each other. And I thought, well, you're right. Maybe I need to compose even the painting within each, in a sequence. So this is meant to be this is basically the painting number 1. And best scenario would have it, you have it displayed somewhere and you can join that for maybe spend time with that for a minute and then go on. And the dramatic, the theme of the circles is building up and it's getting louder and more crazy, and finally we can calm down again, right? So so I thought it was a nice relationship with the idea of the music, and that might be a theme I want to follow somehow. This how do I get the time into the issue?
Was it the sky out in Wyoming that inspired you to start?
Yeah, the sky was huge and blue. And this ink is dark blue ink. Currently, I again work on some three-dimensional stuff, so I've taken what I have and tried to propose three-dimensional compositions. I started working with an interior designer in Miami. She asked for something, and hopefully we can work something out. So I would love to go back into even interior space. Why not? If somebody needs a painting, we can paint on the wall, right? So, and building that up. This is, yeah, just a recent painting. These are just taken this week. I just took them, and they're gonna go to, I had a show in Germany what's gonna be extended, and they asked for more paintings, yay, and so I gotta send these off tomorrow. And so that's what's going on right now, combining the techniques again, off the lines, yes, off those straight, more orthogonal, organized patterns together with what's here in blue, the blurred color spaces from the very beginning. So just to round that up, how things come back together, I think. Or maybe I'm surrounding myself consistently and not stepping out of it enough. That's the other thing. These are small ones. They're just 2 feet wide. This is even wrong. It's only 24 feet on paper. Crayon and oil paint. And this is the last painting I did. Well, thank you for that. I have the next action items right on there if you want to see more. So one painting is at the Florida Jury competition, and I got invited to do an artist talk next week on Tuesday, so tell your friends, because it's always nice to have people there with good questions and that I'm critiqued and it's not only yes, 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 right? That's always good. And 2 days after, Saturday, August 30th, I would love to invite you for my open studio if you dare to see stuff in person.
You're going to have work in the projects also?
I do have the 2 long paintings displayed in the project, and my studio is open at the same time, 7 to 10 on
For anyone who
Saturday.
hasn't been to the projects, it's an amazing space. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.